The evening shadows had just started to lengthen when I, George, pulled into the driveway. The day had been grueling, filled with back-to-back meetings and deadlines that seemed to loom larger as the hours ticked by. All I wanted was the comfort of home, the playful banter of my kids, and the soothing presence of April, my wife, who always knew just how to ease the weight from my shoulders. As I trudged through the front door, the house greeted me with its usual comforting silence, indicative of the lull between afternoon activities and dinner time. April was probably upstairs, putting Tina to bed. Dropping my keys on the hall table, I noticed the blinking light of the answering machine. Curiosity piqued, I pressed the play button, expecting nothing more than a reminder for a parent-teacher meeting or a message from April's book club. Instead, a voice that wasn't meant for me filled the room. "Hello? April, yes, it's me, Beth. I was getting out of the shower when my phone rang." Beth's voice trailed off, tinged with a panic that seemed to grip my chest in a vice. I frowned, sinking slowly into the armchair near the console. My heart rate picked up as the message continued, the floor seeming to shift beneath my feet. Beth's voice continued, shaky and frantic. "I just got home from shopping and thought I'd better call you. What's the matter? You sounded so desperate on your message." There was a pause, a muffled sob, and then April's voice, a whisper of the woman I knew. "I did something stupid, Beth. So stupid. And when I tell George about it, he'll divorce me." My breath hitched. Divorce? The word echoed in the hollows of the room, each syllable a hammer strike to my trust. "What's wrong, April?" Beth's voice was a lifeline thrown too late. I slept with Brad tonight. God, I feel awful." The room spun slightly as her words sank in. Brad. The high school sweetheart she'd bumped into at our 10-year reunion last night. The man whose eyes had lingered too long, whose smile had been too knowing. He invited me to dinner and... Oh, Beth, I don't know why I went. Then we went to his room. Her voice cracked, laden with regret and shame. "Don't tell George. He doesn't need to know. It was a mistake. It's over. Brad's leaving for New York in the morning." The rest of the conversation became a blur, their voices a distant thunder as my mind raced. Betrayal, sharp and bitter, filled my mouth like bile. My April, the center of my world, had shattered everything with a few whispered confessions. Frozen, I barely registered the sound of the front door opening, the cheerful chatter of April ushering Tina inside after an apparent impromptu ice cream trip. My heart pounded painfully against my ribs as I struggled to compose myself. How could she act so normal? How could she smile and laugh and pretend our world hadn't just imploded? April's voice floated from the foyer, pulling me back to a reality I no longer recognized. "George, we're home. Tina had to have the biggest Sunday, and..." She stopped abruptly as she entered the living room, her smile fading into confusion at the sight of my stricken face. "George? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." My voice was hoarse, unfamiliar even to my own ears. "April, we need to talk." Her eyes widened, the color draining from her face as she glanced at the still open answering machine. "Oh God, the machine. Did you..." "Yes," I said, the word a shard of ice between us. Tina, oblivious to the tension, tugged at her mother's hand. "Mommy, what's wrong? Why does Daddy look sad?" April forced a smile, her hand reaching out to gently push Tina towards the stairs. "Nothing, sweetie. Why don't you go pick a book, and I'll be up in a minute to read." As Tina scampered away, April turned back to me, her eyes brimming with tears. "George, please, let me explain." "Explain?" I stood abruptly, anger warring with the agony that gripped my chest. "How do you explain betrayal, April? How do you explain lying to the person who loves you more than anything?" The room was thick with unsaid words and broken trust as we stood facing each other, the gap between us wider than ever before. The tape, still looping in the background, played on like a mocking soundtrack to our fractured lives. This chapter sets the stage for the deep emotional turmoil and confrontation that will challenge George and April's relationship, underpinned by the stark betrayal revealed through an inadvertently recorded conversation. The evening after discovering the tape was long and fraught with tension. Neither April nor I found much sleep, each lost in our own swirling thoughts. The air in our bedroom was thick with the unsaid, each of us laying rigidly on our own side of the bed, a vast ocean between us. As dawn broke, so did the fragile silence. April, her eyes swollen from crying, finally broke down and said, "George, we need to talk. I can't let you go on thinking there's more to this." Her voice was hoarse, strained from the weight of her guilt. I sat up, reluctant to face her, but knowing this conversation was inevitable. "What is there to understand, April?" "You betrayed me, our family," I said, my voice a low growl of contained anger. "It was a mistake, George. A terrible, terrible mistake," she pleaded, reaching out a hand but stopping midway, as if she realized the physical distance between us mirrored the emotional gulf. "Why, April?" "Why him?" I asked, the hurt evident in my tone. She sighed deeply, her gaze dropping to her lap. "I don't know, George. It was the past knocking, and I foolishly opened the door. We were just talking about old times, and one thing led to another. I felt lost, caught up in a moment I thought had long passed." I looked away, unable to bear the sincerity in her eyes, a sincerity that twisted the knife deeper into my already wounded heart. "Did you think about us? About our daughters? What this would do to them if it ever came out?" I asked, my voice rising with a mix of fear and anger. April flinched, as if the words were physical blows. "Every day, George. It haunts me every day, and I am so sorry. I love you and Tina more than anything. It was a one-time indiscretion that I regret deeply." Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. We sat in silence for a moment, the distance between us filled with years of shared memories now tainted by her confession. "I need time, April. I need space to think," I finally said, standing to leave the room. "George, please." She reached out again, this time her fingers brushing against my arm, sending a shiver through me despite my resolve. "Don't let this be the end of us." I paused at the door, not turning back. "I don't know what this is right now, April, but I can't look at you the same way. Not yet." Leaving April in the room, I headed downstairs, my mind a whirlwind of pain and confusion. As I made coffee, the quiet of the early morning felt like a blanket, simultaneously comforting and suffocating. Later, as Tina and her younger sister Ella came bounding down the stairs for breakfast, their laughter and chatter filled the kitchen. They were blissfully unaware of the storm that had engulfed their parents' lives. I forced a smile, pushing my turmoil aside to focus on making their breakfast, a stack of pancakes, their favorite. "Daddy, why are your eyes red? Did you get something in them?" Ella asked innocently as she climbed onto her seat. "Just didn't sleep well, Pumpkin," I managed to say, turning back to the stove to hide the fresh sting of tears. "Mommy looks sad too. Are you guys getting a cold?" Tina chimed in, her brow furrowed in concern. "Something like that, sweetie," I replied, my heart aching at the innocence in their questions. As they ate, chatting about school and friends, I watched them, my heart filled with love and fear. How could I protect them from the potential fallout of April's actions? Could I forgive her for not only the betrayal, but for the risk she posed to our family's happiness? The rest of the day passed in a blur of normalcy that felt anything but normal. I took the girls to school, went to work, and returned home to a house that felt both familiar and alien. April tried to speak to me again after dinner, but I couldn't. Not yet. The wound was too fresh, the betrayal too sharp. That night, as I lay in bed alone, the space next to me cold and empty, I wondered about the future. Could forgiveness ever find a place in my heart again? Could our marriage survive this quiet betrayal? Or had April's lapse in judgment irrevocably broken the trust that was the foundation of our life together? As the moon cast a pale glow through the window, I realized the coming days would test us like never before. The weekend drifted by with an uneasy calm, each of us navigating the shared spaces of our home with a careful avoidance of the elephant in the room. Monday morning brought with it a palpable tension as April and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen, the girls having left for school. April was the first to break the silence, her voice a mix of resolve and fear. "George, we can't keep going like this. We need to face what's happened. I need to explain." I leaned against the counter, arms folded, my gaze fixed on the coffee cup in my hand rather than her face. "Explain what, April? How you betrayed our family? How you shattered everything?" She took a deep breath, steadying herself against the sting of my words. "Yes, I betrayed you, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. But I need you to know it wasn't because I don't love you. It was a horrible mistake." Her words, intended to mend, only fueled a bitter laugh. "A mistake? April, mistakes are when you forget to turn off the lights, not when you decide to sleep with someone else." April's eyes welled up with tears, but she held my gaze, her voice desperate. "It was more than a moment of weakness. It was a culmination of feeling unnoticed and unloved." "Unnoticed? Unloved?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "I have been here, April, loving you, making a life with you. How dare you use that as an excuse?" "I'm not using it as an excuse, George. I'm trying to explain how I felt," she pleaded, taking a tentative step towards me. "We've both been so caught up in our roles, me with the kids and you with work, that we've neglected us." I felt alone, George. The room fell silent, the air thick between us. I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, the woman I had loved unconditionally. It felt like staring at a stranger. "You felt alone," I echoed, the words bitter. "So your solution was to find comfort elsewhere?" "It wasn't about finding comfort in someone else. It was about feeling something, anything that made me feel alive again. And it was wrong, so incredibly wrong," she said, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. I shook my head, feeling a cold detachment settle over me. "And what now, April? What do you want from me?" "I want forgiveness, George. I want a chance to rebuild what I broke. I know it won't be easy or quick, but I am willing to do whatever it takes," she said earnestly. "Forgiveness?" I scoffed, feeling the sting of betrayal as raw as the moment I heard her confession. "I don't know if I can. How can I trust you, April? How can I look at you and not see this betrayal? I don't know. But I will spend my life showing you that I am still the woman you married, the woman who loves you," she responded, her voice firm with resolve. "Loves me?" I questioned, the irony of the statement not lost on me. "You have a strange way of showing it." April reached out, touching my arm gently. "Please, George, don't let this be the end of us." I pulled away from her touch, the gesture too painful, too reminiscent of a time when her touch meant safety, not betrayal. "I need time, April. Time to think, to decide what I want. For now, I paused, the words heavy on my tongue. "I can't be around you." Turning away, I left the room, her soft sobs following me as I went upstairs to the solitude of our room. My room, for now. The confrontation had laid bare the raw wounds of our fractured marriage. The path to forgiveness seemed a steep climb, and I was unsure if the journey was one I was ready to make. As I closed the door behind me, the finality of the space between us felt like the closing of a book, one whose ending was uncertain and unwritten. The days that followed were cloaked in a palpable, unsettling calm. April tried to bridge the chasm between us with small talk and attempts at normalcy, but I found myself retreating further into my shell, brooding over the betrayal and the fracture it caused in our lives. The idea of revenge began as a whisper in my mind during the long, sleepless nights. It morphed into a constant hum by day, a call that grew louder with each passing moment of silence between us. I was consumed by the thought of confronting Brad, the man who had disrupted our marriage with such ease. I needed him to feel a fraction of the pain I was enduring. Late one evening, while April was putting the girls to bed, I sat in the dim light of my home office, scrolling through social media pages and old emails, looking for any clue that would lead me to Brad. My heart raced as I found his LinkedIn profile, still in New York, still the smug face I remembered from the reunion. Planning something? The soft voice came from the doorway, where April stood, wrapped in a robe, her expression a mix of concern and fear. I minimized the browser window, turning to face her. "Just some work," I lied, my voice flat. She didn't move, her eyes searching mine. "It doesn't have to be like this, George. We can work through it." "Work through it?" I echoed, the bitterness evident in my tone. "How, April?" "By pretending it never happened?" She sighed, stepping into the room, her demeanor weary. "No, not by pretending. By facing it, dealing with it together." "By facing it? You mean facing him?" I asked sharply, my anger resurfacing. April paused, her lips parting slightly as if the thought had only just occurred to her. "You're not thinking of doing something reckless, are you?" Reckless. The word hung in the air, mocking me with its implication of irrationality. "What's reckless is thinking everything can just go back to how it was," I retorted. April's shoulders slumped, and she looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I just don't want you to do something you'll regret." "Like you regretted?" The words slipped out, venomous and harsh. She flinched, then nodded slowly. "Yes, like I regretted." Leaving the conversation hanging, she retreated, her departure as silent as her entrance. The following morning, I made a call to an old friend who now lived in New York. "Hey, Tom, it's George. Listen, I need a favor." Tom's voice was wary, yet warm. "Sure, anything for you. What's up?" "I need you to find someone for me. It's personal," I explained, my voice a mixture of resolve and embarrassment. "No problem, man. Just send me the details," Tom assured me, his tone devoid of judgment. After hanging up, I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing with scenarios. What would I say to Brad? How would I confront him? The fantasies of confrontation played out vividly in my mind, each more satisfying than the last. Days later, Tom's text arrived. "Got an address for you." He's still in NYC. I would fly to New York, confront Brad, and make him understand the destruction he had been a part of. It was a simple plan, driven by a complex tangle of emotions. As I booked my flight, a sense of purpose filled me. It was not a resolution to my marital strife, nor a solution to the pain that gnawed at my insides. But it was something, a step, a movement in the stagnant air that had suffocated me since the day I heard the tape. Revenge, as they say, was a dish best served cold, and as the wheels of the plane lifted off the tarmac, my heart was as cold as it had ever been. New York was bustling as always, its streets a flurry of motion and noise that seemed to echo the turmoil in my heart. I found myself outside a nondescript building in Lower Manhattan, the address Tom had given me etched into my mind like a scar. Taking a deep breath, I entered the lobby, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and dread. The elevator ride to Brad's office on the 14th floor felt interminable, each floor ding sounding like a countdown to a confrontation I both longed for and feared. I stepped out into a sleek, modern office space, the walls lined with framed accolades and photos of Brad smiling alongside various high-profile clients. A receptionist looked up, her smile faltering slightly at the stern expression on my face. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but cautious. "I need to see Brad. It's urgent," I stated, my voice firm. "Do you have an appointment?" she inquired, already reaching for the phone. "No," I replied curtly, "but he'll want to see me." Hesitation flickered across her face, but after a brief pause, she nodded and dialed an extension. "Mr. Thompson, there's Mr. George here to see you. He says it's urgent." A moment of silence, then a muffled response. Send him in. Brad's office was a testament to his success, with a stunning view of the city skyline behind him. He stood as I entered, his expression one of surprise morphing into recognition. George, this is unexpected. To what do I owe the pleasure? Brad asked, his tone overly congenial as he extended his hand. I ignored his hand, my gaze steady. We need to talk about April. The smile faltered on Brad's lips, his brow furrowing. April? Is she okay? You seem concerned now, I scoffed, crossing my arms. You weren't so concerned when you were destroying her marriage. Brad's expression hardened, his posture straightening as he withdrew his hand. I think you better get to the point. The point is, you took advantage of a moment's weakness. You helped her betray her family, I accused, my voice low and controlled. Brad sighed, sinking back into his chair. George, what happened between April and me was a mistake. We both regret it. A mistake? You call it a mistake to sleep with another man's wife? I countered, my anger rising. It wasn't planned, George. We both got caught up in a moment I deeply regret, Brad admitted, his tone sincere but frustratingly calm. And what about the damage left in that moment's wake? Do you regret that too? The pain you caused? I pressed, needing him to acknowledge the depth of the hurt. Brad looked down, a slight shake of his head indicating his discomfort. I do, and I'm truly sorry for the pain I've caused you and April. Sorry doesn't fix what's been broken, I snapped, the words sharp and bitter. I know, Brad conceded, looking up with a grimace. I can't undo the past, George. All I can say is that it will not happen again. I've stayed away since that night. Staying away now doesn't change what you did, I said, my voice cold. There was a long silence, the tension thick between us. Finally, Brad spoke. What do you want from me, George? I want you to know the pain you've caused, I replied, meeting his gaze firmly. I want you to live with that knowledge, just as I have to live with the images of betrayal that haunt me every day. Brad nodded slowly, his face solemn. I understand. And again, I am truly sorry. The apology, sincere as it might have been, did little to quell the storm inside me. Yet standing there, facing the man who had played a role in the unraveling of my life, I felt a strange shift, a realization that revenge might not bring the solace I sought. Make sure it doesn't happen again. To anyone, I said finally, turning to leave. George, Brad called out as I reached the door, I hope you find a way to heal, for you and April's sake. Without looking back, I left the office, the encounter leaving a bitter taste, but also a faint glimmer of something else, perhaps the beginning of closure. As the plane touched back down in my hometown, a heavy weight rested on my shoulders, different from the fury that had driven me to New York. The confrontation with Brad hadn't provided the catharsis I had expected. Instead, it left me grappling with the complexities of forgiveness and the stark reality that my marriage's wounds might not heal with retribution alone. I returned home to find the house unsettlingly quiet. April was at the kitchen table, paperwork spread out before her, but she looked up the moment I entered, searching my face for clues to how the encounter had gone. How did it go? She asked tentatively, her voice barely above a whisper. I tossed my keys on the counter and shrugged off my coat, feeling the fatigue of the journey weigh me down. It went as well as it could have, I replied, avoiding her gaze as I sat at the opposite end of the table. April nodded, absorbing my terse response. She bit her lip, hesitating before speaking again. Did you get what you were looking for? I sighed, rubbing my temples as I considered her question. I don't know, April. I wanted him to understand the pain he caused, and I think he does. But it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change how I feel. April's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away, maintaining a semblance of composure. I know, and I'm so sorry that my actions put you through this. Is there anything I can do to make this better? Her earnestness was evident, and it tugged at the frayed edges of my resolve. I don't know if there's anything you can do, April. This isn't something that can be fixed just because we want it to be. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the unsaid and the undone. Finally, April reached across the table, her hand stopping midway, as if she remembered the physical and emotional distance now between us. George, I know I've broken something very precious between us. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to help mend it, if it's even possible. Therapy, counseling, anything. I looked at her extended hand, a symbol of her desire to bridge the gap she had created. Slowly I reached out, taking her hand in mine. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental in its difficulty. Maybe we should start with counseling, I said, the words tasting foreign on my tongue. It might help us understand if this is something we can move past, or if it's just too broken. April nodded, a small spark of hope flickering in her eyes. Okay, I'll look for a counselor first thing tomorrow. Whatever it takes, George. As we both stood, there was an awkward pause before April impulsively stepped forward, wrapping her arms around me in a tentative embrace. I stiffened, my body not yet ready to return the gesture, but I didn't pull away. After a moment, she stepped back, giving me a small, sad smile. Thank you for trying, George, for not walking away. Not yet. I nodded, unable to find the words to express the turmoil inside me. As she turned to go upstairs, I remained in the kitchen, lost in thought. The road to recovery, if it was even possible, would be long and fraught with challenges. But perhaps, with time and effort, there could be a chance for us to find our way back to each other, to rebuild what had been so carelessly broken. The aftermath of my journey was not the resolution I had hoped for, but it opened a door to potential healing, a path fraught with uncertainty, but worth exploring nonetheless. The weeks that followed were a testament to the slow, often painful process of reconciliation and healing. April and I began attending weekly counseling sessions, each visit unraveling the tightly wound threads of resentment and hurt that had woven themselves through our relationship. One rainy afternoon, after a particularly intense session, we found ourselves sitting quietly in the car, listening to the rhythmic patter of rain on the roof. I never realized how distant we'd become, even before. Everything happened, April murmured, staring out the window at the blurred cityscape. I glanced over at her, noting the fatigue etched into her features. It's like we were living parallel lives. I guess it was easier to ignore the growing space between us than to confront it. April turned to look at me, her eyes seeking mine. I'm sorry for not reaching out more, George, for letting my fears and insecurities build walls between us. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my own contributions to our estrangement. I should have seen it too. I should have been more present. We both let the gap widen. Reaching across the console, I took her hand, an action that had once been second nature but now felt laden with significance. She squeezed my hand gently, a silent acknowledgement of our mutual commitment to mend what had been broken. Back at home, we found new ways to integrate healing into our daily lives, not just for ourselves, but for our daughters, who had sensed the tension even if they hadn't understood it. One evening, while I was setting up a board game for a family night, Tina, our oldest, looked up from her puzzle. "Are you and Mommy going to be okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with the unspoken worries of a child. April knelt beside her, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "We're working on it, sweetie. We both love you and your sister very much, and no matter what, we're a family." "Yeah," I added, joining them on the floor. "Your mom and I are trying to fix some grown-up problems, but we're doing it together. Sometimes, even adults need to learn how to be better at being together." Tina nodded, seemingly appeased for the moment. "Okay, can we all play the game together then, like we used to?" "Of course we can," April smiled, and there was a hint of the old warmth in her expression. a reminder of the family we were before the storm and what we might become again. As we played, laughter slowly began to weave its way back into the fabric of our interactions. It was tentative at first, like the first fragile shoots of green after a long, harsh winter, but it was there, promising growth. During our therapy sessions, we tackled the tough questions about trust and forgiveness. Trust is like a mirror. You can fix it if it's broken, but you can still see the cracks, our counselor had said in one session, a metaphor that resonated deeply with me. I know there will always be cracks, I acknowledged one evening, as April and I sat on our back porch, watching the sun set in a spectacular display of orange and pink. But maybe those cracks can remind us not to take our relationship for granted again. April leaned her head on my shoulder, a gesture of affection that I had missed profoundly. I can live with that, she whispered. And maybe, in time, those cracks will help us reflect on how far we've come instead of how far we fell. The path to healing was neither straight nor easy, and it was marked by moments of backsliding, where old fears and insecurities threatened to undo the progress we'd made. But with each step forward, we found a little more of the strength that had first drawn us together, and a little more of the hope that had once defined our union. As the season changed and the first leaves of autumn began to fall, so too did some of the barriers between us. Our family's healing was not complete, but for the first time in a long while, it felt possible. Months had passed since April and I began our journey into counseling, and although each step forward was labored and fraught with the residue of past hurts, we had slowly started to rebuild. Our home began to feel less like a battleground of unspoken words and more like the haven it had once been. One crisp autumn evening, as we sat by the fireplace wrapped in blankets, April broke the comfortable silence. "Do you think we can ever get back to where we were?" she asked, her voice soft but carrying a weight of genuine concern. I looked over at her, the flickering light casting dancing shadows on her face. "I don't think we can go back, April," I replied after a thoughtful pause. "But maybe we can build something new, something maybe even better." She considered this, nodding slowly. I like the sound of that. Building something new. She sighed, leaning her head against my shoulder. "Do you ever think about the what-ifs?" "All the time," I admitted. "But dwelling on them doesn't change where we are now. It only takes away from what we can be doing to move forward." April squeezed my hand, her grip firm and warm. "Thank you for staying, for fighting for us. I know it wasn't the easy choice." "It wasn't," I agreed, "but it was the right choice. For us, for our family." The warmth from the fireplace did little to compare to the warmth April's words brought to my heart. As the weeks turned into months, the shift in our relationship became more evident not only to us, but to our daughters as well. One Saturday morning, as we all made breakfast together, Tina, ever the observant one, piped up, "You and Mommy are laughing a lot more. I like it." April and I exchanged a look, a small smile playing on her lips. "We are, aren't we?" she said, turning to flip a pancake. "It's good to laugh." "Yeah," I chimed in, handing Tina a plate of cut fruit. "Mommy and Daddy have been working on some adult homework to understand each other better." "Like how I do homework to get better at math?" Tina asked, her brow furrowing slightly. "Exactly like that," April responded, her tone light. "And just like you, we're learning and getting better." It was conversations like these that showed us the ripples of our efforts, touching not just the core of our relationship, but our family as a whole. However, healing didn't mean the absence of challenges. We had our days where old fears and doubts surfaced, threatening the delicate peace we were nurturing. During one such evening, as we sat discussing an upcoming family event, April's insecurities flared. "What if we can't handle it? What if we fall back into old patterns under stress?" she asked, worry creasing her forehead. "We might," I said honestly, reaching across the table to take her hand. "But every time we pull through, we get a little stronger. We have tools now, ways to communicate better. We're not the same people we were. You really believe that, don't you? April asked, a hint of admiration in her voice. I do, I affirmed. I believe in us, April. As we approached the holiday season, a time previously fraught with stress and unspoken tension, we planned a small renewal ceremony. It wasn't just about reaffirming our commitment, but celebrating the new foundation we were laying. Surrounded by close family and friends, we spoke new vows, not of idealistic promises, but of realistic acknowledgments of our journey and the path we were committed to continue walking together. As I looked into April's eyes, repeating the vows we crafted together, the question of happily ever after found its answer not in fairy tales, but in the reality of our perseverance. Happily ever after wasn't a given. It was a daily choice, a moment-by-moment decision to forge something lasting from the crucible of past pains. Our story wasn't perfect, but it was ours, marked by the kind of trials that either break you or build you. For April and me, for our family, we chose to build, and that made all the difference. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If today's story resonated with you, or if you've experienced similar challenges in your relationships, remember you're not alone. We hope this video offers some insight or comfort as you navigate your own path forward. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We value your perspectives and would love to hear your stories too. Join us next time for another profound exploration of the heart's resilience. Until then, take care and keep seeking your truth.